evening, you lovely sycophants. Welcome to this week's episode of Video Ferox, where we find ourselves neck deep in Milking the Dragon month. That's right, Brucesploitation movies out the yang, including a movie that is so bold to exploit Bruce Lee while simultaneously commentating on Bruce Lee's exploitation. It's Dynamo. So sit back, enjoy the trailer, and we'll be right back.
He's more powerful than you've ever seen him before. He's a high-powered, two-stick, one-man dynamo. See Bruce Lee take on assassins in Korea. Judo killers in Japan. And the most dangerous of all foes in the boxing arena in Chicago. Don't miss Dynamo when it explodes on your motion picture screen. It's a powerhouse of action.
Alrighty, that was the trailer to Dynamo from 1978, starring Bruce Lee, who, of all the clones of Bruce Lee, I think Bruce Lee is probably my favorite. He looks the best, and he's got the best kung fu, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, he looks really good in the tracksuit. This was expected. This was obviously one of those type of, Bruce Lee imitation movies. They had to have the yellow tracksuit, but if they're going to do that, they have to have somebody that can hold that shit, and he does it pretty well.
Unlike the other Brucesploitation movies that we've looked at in the month, and just in general, this one actually has something to say. So I won't say that it's a strong story, but I will say that it does have an intent behind it.
It talks a lot about corporate domination, how...
Corruption in the system.
How people are basically chewed up and spat back out once they're of no use to a corporation.
It basically takes a person who doesn't want to be Bruce Lee, makes him into Bruce Lee, and then the effects on him after that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not exactly a very deep story, not a very well-executed story. I think there's a lot of places where they could have fixed things, but I think generally I enjoyed it.
The cinematography in this is actually pretty solid. But there are the usual tropes, like the medium running close-up, zoom-out, shot that you always get in a martial arts movie, but that's expected, because that's the type of film this is.
All right, to the spoilers then. Let's get on with it. So the movie opens up with an extremely low-budget version of a James Bond opening. Now, if you thought The Game of Death was extremely James Bond, this is extremely James Bond except the dollar store version.
Yeah, basically it's a bunch of shots of Tokyo, of billboards and video stuff and posters and whatnot. A lot of neon, a lot of flashing lights and everything.
You get a lot of naked dancing women, and they've got that kind of projection thing on them, so you can't really see. All they are is silhouettes.
And the credits are typically cheap looking, white on the background there, and then it goes immediately, more or less, into this basically a plane landing at an airport, and this Chinese woman from America has come to Tokyo to do some business. She works for a corporation, the kind of parent office of this Hong Kong business.
It is essentially in a war between this ad agency and that ad agency. And so, if you've ever wanted a Brucesploitation versus Mad Men mashup, this is the movie for you.
So this lady, Miss Mary, her chauffeur, she takes on as her personal assistant and fixer. He says, I'm a fixer. I fix things for people. And she said, well, how would you like a pay raise and to be my personal assistant? Well, what would I be doing? Well, if I want a square turned into a circle, you'd be the guy to do it. Okay, I'm your man.
And then, as they're driving along, they cut into true Brucesploitation territory, because all of a sudden we get footage of actual Bruce Lee, and his funeral. And this is the point of the movie where, okay, with a Brucesploitation movie, you generally get the public domain footage of Bruce's funeral exploitating the poor man's death. But here, they're actually commentating on it because she says, well, what the hell's going on? Who are all these people? And it's like, oh yeah, the Bruce Lee international film star just died. And she's like, oh, interesting. And the driver, he's continuing on about they're really explaining the hell out of it. The magazines that cost 50 cents the last week now cost you $3. So the movie is commentating on explaining Bruce Lee while simultaneously exploiting Bruce Lee.
They jump more or less immediately into this woman's idea of trying to find a replacement for Bruce Lee, but in the meantime, she's got to get this corporation back on its feet. And the way they're going to do that is corporate raiding. Good old-fashioned bribe and drive out and, just steamroll over the competition.
They get blackmail material on some rising talent that they want to headhunt. And so they're like, the woman comes in and she like, hey, let's go out on a date. Goes out on a date, gets incriminating photos, and then she shows up later and it's like, well, it'd be a real shame if these photos got out. But if you sign this contract, it all goes away.
So there's a horse race going on, and the competition of this, I guess it's this elderly guy who runs this ad agency. One of Miss Mary's men approaches him about doing some work and mentions that they can make his horses run better. So they get an acupuncturist who goes in there and sticks all these needles, and they actually stuck acupuncture needles into this horse standing in the stall. Said, yeah, this gets all the nerves and it's going to make him better. He's under a lot of stress. And the horse wins the race, and this man is like, oh my God, you won, ha yes, whatever you want, you can have it. And so they do corporate takeover not only by force or by subterfuge, but by basically making the competition a little better so that they're kind of grateful enough to hand over a certain amount of control to Miss Mary. And the fact is, this woman doesn't give a shit who she steps on. She says, we know if there's any collateral damage, tough shit. Basically, she sees it as a game. She's in her element, and she sees Bruce lie while she's driving down the road. This cab has been stolen by some guy, and Bruce is in another one of the cabs in the same company. As they say, oh, cab 35 has been stolen. So he goes and chases this guy down. It happens to be like two guys in this car.
And this is, of course, where we get our first instance of stolen music, because it's this car chase, very light car chase, under the soundtrack of The Devil's Gun, this disco song from like 1975 or 76, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of disco in this movie. In fact, a lot of the movies shot in Hong Kong used disco in club scenes because it was really, really hugely popular, insanely popular. So Bruce stops this guy, these two guys in the car, right in front of Miss Mary and her fixer, and they nearly crash into each other. Bruce cuts the other two off, beats the shit out of them with his fists and stuff, and they get the best of him here and there, and then he gets a wooden pole and beats the crap out of these guys again. Lee gets scouted by Miss Mary when he's fighting. She said, who the hell is that guy? He looks like Bruce Lee, and his moves are fantastic. And so they basically go out and say, hey, how would you like to be a star? And, how would you like to be the next Bruce Lee? And he takes it. He doesn't really think that long on it. He just long enough to tell, his girlfriend's like, well, it's either them or me.
And the movie is essentially a meta-commentary on the pressures of stardom and a almost autobiographical look at Bruce and his real life, because he had rumors of womanizing, and so he was cheating on his girlfriend, and Bruce Lee, he eventually cheats on his girlfriend in the movie. And we get him kind of not quite falling apart, but definitely the pressures of filmmaking and success weighing heavy upon him.
Yeah, he's a good soul, basically, in the most basic way. He's just a guy who likes his girlfriend. He's a hardworking guy who drives a cab all day. And then he gets caught up in this shit. And in order for him to be really up on his game, because his martial arts need some polish, the ad agency goes to a teacher of another Kun, that's basically Chinese for dojo, who has some students, but he's rough on his students. But he wants them. This guy gives these students their lumps. He says, you gotta practice. I did the same thing for 3 years before I was any good at it. He's one of these guys that wants his martial arts to have a core of hard martial arts so they can go out and do whatever. He's not a bad guy. He's just hard because he realizes that good martial arts involves hard work and repetition.
And he is totally 100% your old master, because he's always smoking, he's always drinking, he's this absolute bastard. He's got eyes for the ladies. I mean, he is old master.
But he's not a bad guy. He's actually a really good guy. He's got a heart of gold, but it's a little tarnished by time and drinking. Maybe he didn't have the success he wanted, but he believes in his students, and he knows the way to the path of success is to really clamp down and do the work.
Honestly, these two together are the best thing in the movie. They are absolutely fucking gold.
They're dynamite together.
And just they have this proposition where Old Master says, I'm going to attack you at any time, anywhere, so be ready for it. And he says, you can attack me anytime, anywhere, so be ready to attack me.
And he says, no harm, no foul. I want you to attack me, because it'll make both of them better.
And so as Bruce Lee, because he starts out kind of, he knows Kung Fu, but he's kind of schlubbish a little bit. And at the end of his training, he's actually really good. And you see the two, Old Master and Bruce Lee, kind of grow together.
And the fighting pattern between these two is really funny, because both of them can take a hit and do stunts like fall downs and tumbles and stuff like that.
And so we get to Bruce's big debut and his screen audition, basically, for the evil ad company. And, of course, here comes the tracksuit. We get Bruce wearing the tracksuit, but again, it's not it is invoking the, hey, Bruce wore this in Game of Death. But it's kind of also commentating on it.
And the master says, okay, you guys each get $1,000 if you beat him, but nothing in the face, nor the throat, not the groin, not the back of the neck or whatever. And they go in and they do their particular brand of martial arts. And this is just some really good wide screenshot stuff. There's none of that unsteady cam shit you get in the early 21st century or late 20th century.
And it's definitely more akin to what you would get from like Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest than you would get from like a Bruce Lee movie. So the style isn't quite the same as what a real Bruce Lee movie is, but it's not bad.
This feels more like some of the later stuff that came out. It's not Five Fingers of Death pre-Bruce Lee stuff when Bruce was working in television. It's more the later, like right directly after his death kind of stuff.
The guy who directed Dynamo also did some movies for Shaw Brothers, including probably my favorite Shaw Brothers movie of all time, Super Inframan. It doesn't get quite as crazy as Superman Inframan does, but you can definitely see it has the roots in that movie and that genre versus an actual Bruce Lee movie.
One of the things that I love about movies like that is that even with the monsters were doing the martial arts and stuff, and they had the moves and everything. And just like in this movie, you get that sense of the slight bit of fantasy with these martial arts movies. Because, I mean, let's face it, when you're taking that much damage, you're not just going to get back up and get back in it. Taking all those kicks to the head and stuff.
You brought up the cinematography. There's this one shot after Bruce Lee beats the hell out of Tiger Claw guy, and he's standing there, and his next opponents, they has the boxing helmets on, where it's that kind of padded helmet thing, and there's this one shot where Bruce is in the foreground and he's out of focus, and you see the two guys on either side of him coming up wearing the helmets, and then there's this rack focus between the guys wearing the helmets and Bruce Lee, and it's like, wow, that was actually really effective. There's moments like that sprinkled throughout this entire movie.
Oh yeah, and I mean even the two subplots. You've got two subplots. You've got the subplot of the corporate takeover of Pacific ad company, and then you've got the more granular thing with the opposition, which is run by another Euro guy, and the mob leaning on him in order to make him give up his business. And this kind of circles the drain. You got all this stuff going on.
And after that, Bruce gets his big debut on the center stage, and they send him on a world tour for publicity purposes. And so they go to like Tokyo, they go to South Korea, they go to America, and each one of the stops, it kind of devolves into, if you're familiar with Shaw Brothers, where somebody's just walking along, somebody comes up, challenges them, there's a kung fu fight, and they move on to the next scene. There's a lot of that here going on. So Bruce, he's in Tokyo, he's having a drink at a bar, and one of the other fighters like, hey, that's Bruce Lee, let's go kick his ass. Go over, throws a business card on the bar in front of him and says, meet me tomorrow, I'm going to kick your ass. And Bruce is like, fuck you, crumples up and throws it away. And so they totally ape the dojo scene from Fist of Fury, essentially, where the guys are sitting there, the Japanese guys, they're sitting there all in their gi, and the leader's sitting there, and Bruce comes in and says, oh yeah, you want to fight? Let's fight. And then he beats the hell out of 10 guys.
Yeah.
And then he whips out the katana. So obviously strongly inspired by...
Oh, and they tear this place up. I mean, they've got the shoji screens everywhere, and he tosses a guy through there and jumps to the other side. They just go at it back and forth, crack, crack, crack. Completely humiliates this guy in front of his entire... And all the students, of course. He just cleans house, because that's what the Bruce Lee type of character does.
And then after that, they move to Korea. And I liked that scene because generally you don't get a lot of combat in snow, and it's this one scene set on the ski slopes, and Bruce is skiing along, and then the bad guys say, hey, there's Bruce Lee, let's go kick his ass. And they strap on skis and go ski down to him. And they fight in big ski boots. That's got to be fucking difficult for a kung fu movie. And they fight with like the ski poles, so instead of like swords or butterfly knives. Mm-hmm. So it's a different, interesting take on what we generally get from these sort of movies.
And they're just cracking heads in the snow. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, I never would have conflated Korea with snow ski slopes, but then again, I don't really know anything about Korea, but it was like, well, that's different. I've never seen that in a martial arts movie before, so that was actually kind of fun.
And then we move on to New York, where we get to this scene in a hotel room where Bruce is hanging out and he's about to have dinner, and the concierge is coming in with the plate under the glass, and he's like, hey, you're Bruce Lee, and they start talking and stuff, and he's going about getting stuff off the cart and setting up dinner, and then he pulls out a weapon and goes after Bruce Lee, because that's what you do in New York, apparently.
Of course, and naturally they bust up the entire room because that's what happens. I mean, Bruce tosses this guy all over the place. They tumble over the beds and into the walls and shit like that. Just crack, crack, crack. And this is more dangerous because this is in an enclosed space, because up to this point, he's more or less done this in wide open spaces, but this is the first time he's actually had to do this in something as small as a hotel room. And it's not like a classy one. It's like more like a Fleabag. It's not exactly Fleabag, but it's kind of more of the Sandman Inn versus a Sheraton. And so, he's in a bit more danger because the assassins are pouring out the woodwork.
And they fight down in the garage, and you can see, the exit sign on the wall that is obviously cardboard with like some dude with a Sharpie.
The movie isn't the cheapest, but there are some times the production design is kind of a little glaringly obvious.
What, you're saying they didn't shoot this in New York and they were shooting in Hong Kong somewhere?
Hong Kong? And that the only New York in there was a series of background plates shot for, tying in one thing to another. Gasp.
And guess what? Eventually we get to Madison Square Garden.
Oh, God.
And
this is one of the worst.
And, of course, it's nothing but a whole bunch of stock footage and this ring, and it's against a background, and they've pumped some smoke in there so it looks like Madison Square Garden, but it's clearly not.
And I think they've projected some people onto the background or something. It looks so cheap and obviously small scale. I mean, it's horrendous. It's actually kind of jarring that it's so small and you see almost nothing and nobody in there.
The fight with Dollar Store Bob Wall was really the worst fight of everything. It's really confined and really small and doesn't have energy, and like you're shooting through the ropes. And it just doesn't have the same energy that the rest of the movie does.
You see, I was going to mention, you mentioning Bob Wall, I was going to mention the fight between Bob Wall and Sammo Hung for Game of Death, which was shot in an actual, ring in an actual arena surrounded by 1,000 people.
Oh yeah, that is a much better scene. Or there's that one scene out of Ip Man 2 where Sammo and Donnie Yen, they're fighting on this tabletop, and essentially the same sort of square footage, but there's so much more energy in that scene.
Well, it's like that old Three Stooges boxing short where he hears Pop Goes the Weasel, and Curly hears that and goes nuts and beats up everybody, and they get into this ring, and the entire thing is like a rear projection with most of the people projected on it from some other film, but the only people who were actually in there were like this woman and a kid and a few other, like 5 other people, and it's smoky, but it was shot really well, even though as cheap as it was, at least had the energy of Curly, Howard at the time. I mean, he was on a downslope at that point in his career, but that was a really good boxing scene.
The fights are fixed, and so Bruce finds out that it's like, oh my God, this is fixed. I'm not going to throw down. I'm not going to take a dive. Fuck no. Hell no. And then they're like, well, you're not going to take a dive? Fine. We're going to go kidnap your girlfriend. And so they kidnap their girlfriend. And so Old Master and one of Bruce's friends has to go and save her. And we get a little bit of action there, which is kind of cool.
And he just goes basically apeshit. I mean, he just destroying everything in his path, because at this point, the one thing in his life that was good, he thinks has been taken away. So this kind of sends him into that down spiral where he don't give a fuck what happens.
And so he destroys Bob Wall, but it turns out that, hey, she's not dead. And so it's a happy ending, happy reunion ending where they're at the airport and Bruce is like, oh my God, you're not dead. Hugs the girlfriend, and the evil ad agency lady, she's all like, you're going to give up all this stuff? You're going to give up this fame and pleasure and power? And I loved this scene where he takes off the aviator sunglasses that Bruce always wore and throws them to the ground and walks the fuck out. And the very last shot of the movie before they drive away back to their old lives is a shot of the Old Master sitting there smoking, and he sees him walk away and he just smiles. He's like, okay, this is appropriate. Good on you, kid.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is a case of, everything that's gone up to this point has been to promote Bruce, not for his sake, but for the sake of the ad agency. And he realizes that everything that happened up to this point was kind of bullshit. He had exactly everything he needed before this, Miss Mary showed up in his life. He had his job, he had his loving girlfriend, he had genuine emotion, not derived from fame and fortune and everything. It was stuff he'd worked for in the old-fashioned way. He wasn't promoted. He wasn't promoting somebody else. He was just being happy. If he's going to go home to some dim sum and pot stickers or something like that and some rice wine, that's fine. He doesn't need all the money and running around flying on planes and being in magazines. He just needs what makes him happy, and this is it. And I think this was the best ending they could give the movie. And so this is one case where, it's just basic goodness wins out in the end.
The first 20 minutes or so where it's all setting up the stuff with the ad agency and we don't really get a lot of Bruce. We get like 1 or 2 scenes with Bruce, but it's mostly plot exposition and setup and stuff. That's a little clunky. I think if they had managed to work on that and smooth it out and managed to, I don't know how you would do that.
Intersperse it a little bit more. Maybe even make Bruce part of that. In order for Bruce to be more informed about the people he was working with, have him do ride-alongs. Have Miss Mary more involved in the stuff like with the horses, being there, making the deal, having Bruce there. And then it's, he's got these high expectations. He's seen how things work, and then it starts to crumble around him a little bit, but then he's brought back up by the practice, and he has to put his attentions toward this and that, but then he goes on another ride along, and he's like, this one's a little sketchy. I don't know if I want to remain here, because every one of the people Miss Mary approached, she was pretty upfront about her intentions. I'm using your ass. You've got no choice in the matter. Otherwise, I will deep six you.
So they kind of needed to have done 2 things. They needed to kind of big up Bruce Lee a little more at the beginning and put an emphasis on him and basically build up where he was coming from and his happy life that he will eventually return to at the end of the movie. And they kind of needed to build up her more.
I think that her kind of almost psychopathic need to run the company, she acts one way, and then she totally does this Dr. Jekyll turnaround, like she didn't expect this guy to come up and say something about how she just blackmailed him. And then she sends her fixer to this other ad agency with the older guy, the guy with the horse. And it's the same thing. Sign this contract. You know, we'll fix your horse, but then we own you. Sign this contract, which they do, of course. And the man eventually signs after his horse wins.
So the nugget of a good script is there, with just a little bit more polish and a little more, I don't know, modern sensibility, I guess you would say, than the kind of thrown together 1970s exploitation to make them quick and make them dirty.
This almost has enough plot for 2 movies. You've got the corporate takeover and this woman in charge who's doing this whole 70s thing where it was a lot of basically kill or be killed. And then you've got Bruce Lee, who's becoming this media superstar because of his martial arts and all the training and everything. And it almost feels like the two could be completely separate from each other, except in those instances where Bruce and Mary are obviously on screen together, but it feels sometimes not like it's contrived, but like they wanted to do 2 different things, and they pared down a couple of scripts, and basically they did the cut method, where they take scripts and toss the shreds up in the air and paste them together.
But it's not quite as egregious as last week's movie, where it was 2 completely separate movies mushed together. Here, it just kind of overlapping from different themes.
It feels like 2 different scripts made into a single movie, as opposed to 2 different movies made into a single one.
I think at the end of the day, this movie has enough to recommend that I can fully recommend it versus, okay, we're just watching it just to watch it. I think there is actually something here to offer.
I like it better than the other ones we reviewed so far. I liked it better than the Frankenstein that was Deadly Fingers and Shaolin Bronze Man. It feels a little less ambitious than this one does, mainly because the action takes place is supposed to take place in one location, whereas this one has jet setting and corporate domination and assassination attempts and stuff, and honestly, more polished martial arts scenes. I mean, I love the progression of Lee being this kind of slightly sloppy but more advanced student who then gets whelped by the master until he turns into a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, so you could do a hell of a lot worse for Brucesploitation movies than watching this. It's well executed enough, it's entertaining enough, the kung fu is good, so yes, we give it a glowing endorsement.
Yeah.
Wow. Alright, we'll catch you next week. That'll do it.
In man's search for a new measure of excellence comes Oldsmobile. And Wade Motor Company has them all, whether it be a 98, Cutlass, Omega, Tornado, or GMC truck. You can trade with Wade. Wade Motor Company, your exclusive Oldsmobile and GMC dealership for Boyle, Garrard, Lincoln, Casey, and Mercer counties.
Well, thank you for joining us as we dissect Dynamo. Next week, me and Ashley, we wrap up Milking the Dragon month by watching
The Last Dragon.
So join us here for that. Drop me an email. thevideonastyproject@gmail.com is the address. And until that time, friends, I want you to be like water and stay evil.
Well, I didn't expect that I'd find you out here. Huh. All alone? In such a quiet place? Dangerous.